Hi, I'm Ken Rockburn. Welcome to Talk Politics. Coming up on the program tonight, when the PC Party and the Canadian Alliance merged, it was a slap in the face to David Orchard, who'd been promised in writing that that would never happen. But he's not taking it lying down. We'll talk to him on the program. It's going to be an interesting show. Stay with us. Well, it may be history, but it's not dead to David Orchard. Back in May of 2003, David Orchard threw his support, he may recall, behind Peter MacKay at the Progressive Conservative Leadership Convention, and that support put Mr. MacKay over the top. The win was based on a written deal between Messrs. Orchard and MacKay, the first provision of which said, no merger, joint candidates with alliance. Well, Peter MacKay became leader of the PC Party at that convention, but before the year was out, he had reneged on that promise to David Orchard, and the Progressive Conservative Party was merged with the Canadian Alliance to become the Conservative Party of Canada. The PC Party ceased to exist, but David Orchard was not taking it lying down. He went to court. David Orchard joins me in the studio. Thanks for coming back in.
It wasn't even before the year, it was before the summer was out.
It was before the summer was out. You're right. I could have made it even more dramatic by saying it was before the summer was out. That's right, because this is a copy of that deal that you signed. We all saw that one, and that's dated May 31st, 2003. And this is the agreement in principle on the establishment of the Conservative Party of Canada between Stephen Harper and Peter MacKay, dated October 15th, 2003. Of course, theirs is a lot thicker than yours, by the way.
That's right.
But, you know, it's funny. I was looking at these two things, and I thought, they have their founding principles here on the first 2 pages of this thing, this agreement in principle that they have. And the only one that I could find that bore any resemblance to anything in the one that you had with Peter MacKay was, and this is quoting from theirs now, a belief that the quality of the environment is a vital part of our heritage to be protected by each generation for the next. There was a reference to environment. Nothing else that you had in your agreement showed up in this one. Let's just talk about that. And we're going to show a clip in a minute from the convention because we did this documentary on it here on the show. But how betrayed did you feel when you realized that Peter MacKay was going back on his word to you?
Well, it was a complete betrayal. I mean, as you point out, the very first point in our agreement was no merger with the Canadian Alliance. And this, of course, had been the platform that Mr. MacKay had run on all through our leadership race, that he was going to build the Progressive Conservative Party. And when we did that deal, he shook hands with me, and he looked me in the eye and said, David, we're going to rebuild this party. So it wasn't just, of course, a betrayal of David Orchard. It was a betrayal of all of those who have supported the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada. This is the party that founded our country. This is the party that John A. Macdonald and George Etienne Cartier led. All those great leaders from Robert Borden through to John Diefenbaker and others, and that party is no more. It no longer exists. And the point that I made was that we had to have a moderate alternative to the Liberals if we were ever going to defeat them. And they said, oh no, we just have to merge unite the right was the slogan. Yeah. Well, they united the right, and what happened? In this last election, this new party got far fewer votes than the votes that went to those two parties before. So it didn't work. This idea of moving to the right wing, I don't think that's where most Canadians are. So I think it betrayed Progressive Conservatives, but I think it betrayed those Canadians out there who wanted a moderate alternative.
All right, let's go back to the convention. As I said, we have a clip, and I'm going to run it here in a second. This is a period of time during the convention when it came right down to your support being needed to put either Peter MacKay into the leadership or Jim Prentice into the leadership. And there was an awful lot of toing and froing and lobbying and convincing going on down there on the floor at that convention, trying to get the delegates, the Orchard delegates in particular, to go one way or the other. What we're going to see here are two clips put together. We've strung them together here. One is some delegates trying to convince an Orchard supporter, one of your supporters, to go with Jim Prentice and not with Peter MacKay. There's some interesting comments made by somebody in this one. Followed by one of your workers coming to your supporters outside and saying, here's what we understand has happened. So we'll watch that, and then I'm going to get you to comment on it. Let's take a look at this clip. This is from May of 2003.
One chance to save Canada right now, right? And the Liberals are going to give up the Canadian dollar, right? Whatever the alliance is going to give up the Canadian border.
If we put
perhaps we can save those two things.
If we put MacKay in tonight, we've got another 8 years of Liberal government.
Exactly.
Guaranteed.
The idea that MacKay is going to respect you in the morning is delusional.
Time will tell.
McKay's not going to respect you in the morning. He says different things to different people depending on where he is. It's the same with this. He'll tell Orchard what he wants to get his vote, but...
well, the thing is, if he doesn't have Orchard, he's not going to win. If he doesn't win, he's going to be down to 2 seats again, and there's no sense in him even doing all this, right?
Well, that's the thing. But at least with Prentice, you know where you stand. Prentice has policies. You may not agree with them, but he has them, and he is willing to negotiate about them. He's willing to learn.
I understand. McKay, well, everybody is going to make their own decision, right? It's a private vote, right?
Yep.
Secret vote. And in the end, we're going to see how it turns out on the numbers.
I'm just scared about McKay winning it.
I want to also talk to David to see what he says, because so far it's all rumor, right?
Yeah.
I've talked to many, ladies and gentlemen here.
All I ask is that you give it a lot of thoughts.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm going to have to.
What has happened is Dickinson worked with Peter McKay. He got something in writing that went after our points that we wanted raised, which was a review of free trade and the whole commission, government and environmental. Now, I don't know all the details, but those were like the highlights and the overview. So David has asked us to go and support him, to support McKay. Okay?
Let's go. He's chairing something?
We're not sure of all the details, but they worked something out. We got it in writing, so let's hold them to it, okay? Our job isn't over yet. Okay? Got it? Got it?
There, we've got something in writing. Let's hold them to it. Well, that didn't work out the way it was. I thought that young Prentice supporter was a little prescient in his description of Peter McKay, however.
Yes.
Turned out to unfold exactly that way. So tell me then, looking back on that, why did you go with McKay? Because he was willing to write something down and Jim Prentice wasn't? That's what we kept hearing. Is that true?
No, well, both of them were making overtures, but we had to decide one way or the other. And throughout the campaign, Prentice had been the one that had been talking about getting back with the alliance and making noises about joining with the alliance much more than Peter McKay. And Peter McKay had been saying, no, we're going to build the Progressive Conservative Party. So that was some of the background. The other background was that if you're going to be betrayed, if we can put it that way. The idea that McKay had to put it in writing, I felt that this would force him to honor it in a way that might not happen with Prentice, because McKay was certainly seen as the front runner, and here he was giving clearly a concession on the review of the free trade agreement and on not merging with the alliance. I mean, he didn't see that as a concession. He saw that as his platform all the way along. He said, this has always been my position. So given that, then my feeling was that if he's better able to hold the party together, and if he's and many of the people around him were ones who wanted to keep the Progressive Conservative Party together, and I think this was not just my view, but many of the caucus, Mr. Clark and others, I think were totally taken by surprise by McKay's actions later, because it had been Mr. Prentice who had talked more along this line.
Yeah. When it all started to happen, and when they registered the Conservative Party of Canada with the Chief Electoral Officer, the PC Party ceased to exist, the Canadian Alliance Party ceased to exist. You went after the rights to that name, right?
Well, we launched a lawsuit to protect the rights to the name Progressive Conservative. We said that if Mr. McKay wants to go off and merge with anybody else, he can go and do it, but he cannot destroy the Progressive Conservative Party. He hasn't got a mandate to do that, and we don't want to let him. And we went to court to protect the rights of all those who wanted to remain Progressive Conservatives.
Now, it was looking pretty grim there for a while, because they launched a countersuit against you, didn't they?
Well, we lost that at the initial level, and then the other side came after us for $200,000 they wanted. And the judge ruled no, that Orchard had raised valid arguments, and both sides should bear their own costs. So they appealed that to the Court of Appeal, demanding $200,000 from myself and the others who had joined me in this lawsuit, but the Court of Appeal threw that out off the bench.
They basically said that you were going around bad-mouthing them, right? I mean, they were suggesting that you were maligning them by talking about the way things had...
Well, they said that I was showing disrespect for the courts, actually, by talking about by speaking against the merger when the matter was before the courts. Well, the judges wouldn't really have anything to do with it. They wouldn't buy that. They said, well, this is a public matter. Orchard it's normal that he would speak against it. The other side is surely speaking for it. And But then the party went on to hold back $70,000 of my donations. These were donations that were made to my leadership bid, checks made to the David Orchard campaign. And yet, when I started the action to fight against the merger, they withheld that money, and they're still withholding it today, $70,297.88.
They still got your money?
They've still got my money. And we've lost
Well, what legal basis do they have to keep your money?
This is a good question. Just as a good question. First, they said, "Well, we're holding it because Orchard's going to owe us $200,000 before we get finished with it."
Okay, they lost that one.
When they lost that one, then they quickly had to try to make up some other reason, and then they said, "Well, Orchard hasn't filed all this paperwork," which was sheer nonsense because we have in writing from the chief financial officer of the new party that all of our documentation was in order. They've settled with Scott Bryson and the others. Scott Bryson's joined another political party, and they've looked after him and paid his deposit. I haven't gone anywhere. I still have a Conservative Party membership in my wallet, and they have not paid me back $70,000.
So are you on the hook for a bunch of bills because you?
Of course, these are bills from my leadership race. You know the way it worked when I was. If Ken Rockburn gave me a check for $100, it was made out to the David Orchard campaign / PC Canada Fund. I had to send that check to the party head office. They would then issue you a tax credit for $100, and they had to return that money to me within 48 hours. Well, they were doing that more or less up till I began fighting the merger, and then they just grabbed the money because we had the right to do that till the end of 2003. So they kept all the donations that I received from the merger time right till the end of 2003. And I guess they've used them to help Mr. Harper lose the last election.
Now, were you about to say you started an action to get that money?
Yes.
I'm sure you have.
Yes, we have.
Okay. So where is it now in the system?
Wending its way very slowly through the first. You have to go through compulsory mediation before you get a court date, but it's wending its way through the Ontario court system. Okay.
Now, you mentioned earlier, before we went to that clip, you were talking about, well, you know, here's what they wanted to do. They wanted to unite the right. They wanted to go after what they saw was this big constituency out there, and they didn't want vote splitting anymore and all the rest of it. But when push came to shove during that last election, they were down. In proportionate terms to what the Progressive Conservative Party was before, or the Alliance was before, less than the two separately?
We were told this new party was going to mean the end of liberal dictatorship in Canada. If the right was just united, then they would defeat the Liberals. It didn't work. This new party got far fewer votes than the combined total of the Alliance and the Progressive Conservative Party in the election before. And we were told it was going to be the other way around. We said that they always told us that 1 + 1 = more than 2, that if we just get together, then there'll be no more vote splitting, and we'll have this nirvana where we'll take power and the Liberals will be sent off where they richly deserve to sit on the sidelines. It didn't happen that way. In fact, in British Columbia and some of the other provinces, the votes dropped dramatically from what they were, and all across the country their votes dropped from what they had before. Because most Canadians don't want to go down that direction. Mr. Harper had advocated that we send troops to participate in the Americans' attack on Iraq. He and Stockwell Day wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal attacking our own government, saying we should be with the Americans in Iraq. Canadians didn't want to take that route. They're advocating deeper integration into the United States. Canadians didn't want that route. Paul Martin ran against Stephen Harper's position of deeper integration in the United States, and then he won the election. And he's rapidly implementing exactly that same Stephen Harper's platform faster than maybe Harper might have done.
Now, one of the things that one of your major issues was a review of free trade, because you don't have a whole lot of truck with the free trade agreement, and in fact that was one of the key elements of your deal with Peter MacKay as well. Now, not too long ago, we saw the head of the Canadian Labour Congress, Ken Giorgetti, deliver a speech in which he suggested that maybe it wasn't such a bad thing after all. Now, once the criticism started being aimed at him, I gather he ameliorated with his comments. But when you start hearing Labour guys suggesting that, well, maybe this isn't the worst thing in the world, how does that make you feel?
Well, I wrote a piece in response to Ken Giorgetti, but this free trade agreement didn't give us free trade at all. We were told we would have secure access to the largest, richest market in the world. We were told in the beef industry that never again would we have to worry about the Americans' misuse of health standards to block us from our access to the U.S. market. Well, what's happened since we entered these deals? We've got a 27% tariff on our softwood lumber. We've got a 10% tariff on hogs. We've got a 10% tariff on wheat. We've got the border closed completely to our exports of beef and bison and mutton and all of that.
Still based on one cow.
Yes.
Yes.
And so the idea that we got free trade out of this is sheer nonsense. We didn't get secure access to the U.S. market, but we've got these American companies coming in and buying up one Canadian company after another, all the way from Macmillan Bloedel, the biggest company in British Columbia, taken over by Weyerhaeuser, to the Molson's I Am Canadian brewery that's now being merged into Coors. Fewer than a dozen major Canadian companies left listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange, widely held Canadian companies. So we're losing our independence and our sovereignty as a nation. And at the same time, these agreements gave the Americans the right to take whatever trade action they want against Canada. We never had a tariff against our softwood lumber before we entered these agreements. We never had tariffs against our wheat. We didn't have the border blocked to our exports of beef. So these deals haven't given us free trade, but we're losing the sovereignty of our nation, and that's always what's driven me.
What do you see happening in the sector that you're most familiar with, which is agriculture? I mean, you're a farmer, and you just told me before we started here you spent all this past summer back there in the real world farming. You know, I know that during the election when we were out west and we talked to cattlemen out west, what we were hearing, which surprised me, was that they are not just upset about the border being closed, but they're also upset about the way they're being treated by pretty much everybody else, the federal government, their own provincial government. I mean, these are guys, independent beef producers, who seem to be getting it in the neck from just about every direction possible. These are the guys that we thought were being helped by some governments that aren't really getting the money at all. It turns out they're very large companies that are with rendering plants that have cattle of their own who seem to be getting all the windfall profits. These guys were very upset.
When I was fighting against the so-called free trade agreement in 1987-88, some of these beef organizations, the hog organizations, said, Orchard, you're all wrong. This is going to give us secure access to that U.S. market. We don't have to worry about the Eastern Canadian market anymore. This is going to be something solid for our industry. What's happened? Now those same organizations are asking me to come and speak to them. I just spoke at a BSE symposium the other day, and they're saying, tell us about NAFTA. I mean, this deal is killing us. We didn't get any secure access. We oriented ourselves straight into the U.S. market. We don't worry about the Eastern Canadian market anymore, all of that beef going straight south. So now we've got a situation where our beef can't go south from Western Canada into the United States, but American beef is still coming from Chicago into Montreal and into the big Ontario markets. Well, our folks out west can't sell their product. And there was a farmer spoke at this symposium. He said, I just sold a 2,800-pound bull. I got the check for $97.50. Now that's what's happened, and at the same time, the slaughtering industry has been completely taken over by the American giants. Tyson, Cargill now control 97% of the slaughter, 93% of the slaughtering capacity in Western Canada. So we've given up our industry.
And they have herds of their own, I was told.
They have huge herds. They have herds that they're not allowed to hold in the United States, but here they can buy their own cattle. Not only that, they're buying this beef in Canada that's at rock bottom prices, the kind of prices I just quoted you. They can put this beef, as long as it's under 30-odd months of age, into boxes and sell it down into the U.S., which is a red-hot market because it's at record highs because Canadian live cattle can't go across the border. So they're buying this beef at such cheap prices here, selling it at high prices in the United States, and making record profits. Their own study out in Alberta said their profits are up 300%. So the industry, we've lost control of our industry, it's moved into foreign hands, it's making record profits, and our people are going broke that are producing the food in this country.
So when you look at the political landscape now, given the fractured and fractious nature of what is going on across the street here on Parliament Hill now with this minority situation, do you see anybody in any of the parties addressing those concerns seriously?
No, I don't. I see more and more Canadians who want our country to be independent, who want our country to be sovereign, and I don't see anyone carrying that line in the House of Commons. As I mentioned, Paul Martin in the last election said, we're going to be Canadian, and Mr. Harper wants to sell us out to the Americans. Well, I think he was right about that, but now he's selling us out even faster. They're talking about putting our military under U.S. command, not only with this Star Wars proposal, but they got this Northcom proposal that would put not only our Air Force, but our Army and our Navy directly under U.S. command. The idea of putting our armed forces under the command of any other country is absolute madness in my view. We should build our armed forces and keep them under Canadian command so they work for our interests in the world. Now they're negotiating this NAFTA Plus agreement that John Manley is co-chairing, the idea of integrating us even more tightly into the United States. at a time when most Canadians are saying, just a minute, we want to have some more independence as a nation, why should we creep around on our hands and knees? You know, we won't even test our animals for BSE because the Americans don't want to test their cattle for BSE. We should be testing every animal in this country for BSE so that we can tell the world this is the safest meat in the world. And then we should develop the Canadian market. We should be moving that Western beef down to Ontario, and we shouldn't be importing any American beef in while they won't take any of ours south across the border. And more Canadians want to do this, build industries here. We should build a shipbuilding industry. Why not a Canadian automobile, a Canadian movie industry, all of those things.
But free trade rules prevent those things from happening. Of
course it does. And so we've got, and if they prevent them from happening, if they prevent us from having a domestic beef market, then we should say these deals aren't working for us. There's a 6-month cancellation clause and we can get out. Those are, oh, well, if we get out of the free trade deal, the sky will fall in. No, it won't. We'll immediately go back to the WTO GATT rules under which Canada and the United States traded since the 1940s. Both Canada and the United States are members of the World Trade Organization. They can't retaliate against us under those rules. And under those rules, we did much better, and we can govern our own country.
But a lot of suppliers and producers and merchandisers from this country, that when they hear you talking like this or anybody else talking like this, that just gives them the heebie-jeebies, because as far as they're concerned, that kind of talk is what's going to shut down that American market. If we actually did that, that American market would be more closed to us now than it is now.
No, actually, that market is more closed to us now than it was before we signed the free trade agreement. As I mentioned, softwood, lumber, beef, all of these. We don't have to be part of this deal to trade freely with the United States. If we got out of the NAFTA agreement and we'd stay in the WTO, we could keep the tariffs at zero and continue to trade widely. Norway stayed out of the European Union. They trade widely with Europe and with North America, but they've kept the right to govern their own country. And now you'll notice that Norway has replaced Canada at the top of the UN's list of best countries in the world in which to live. Switzerland stayed out of the European Union. They've kept their giant multinationals in Switzerland. They trade with Europe. They trade with the rest of the world. We could do the same. Most people aren't even aware that under Chapter 11 of NAFTA, private American corporations can sue the Canadian government for any law or regulation in this country that they don't like. And we've seen them sue us over the gasoline additive. Several of the regulations passed by Canada have been overturned by private American corporations suing our country. They're not allowed to do that under the WTO. So we can still have free trade. I mean, I'm all in favor of having freer trade, but I'm against this kind of a deal where if the United States wants to slap tariffs against us, if they want to force us to our knees in some way or other, they can simply do so, and we're left simply wringing our hands. That's unacceptable. We don't have to do that. We're a huge nation with the kind of resources other countries can only dream of having. Instead of shipping these south, like we're shipping raw logs south, shipping all of that raw natural gas south, instead of doing that, we should be using these resources to build industries in Canada. We're a huge market. Those people who say, oh, well, we just have to be content with supplying the American market. Forget that we're the largest market for goods that the U.S. has. The province of Ontario buys more than Japan from the United States. So we are a big market, and we should look after building that market in Canada. And
they need us as much as we need them.
Of course they do. And this idea that, oh, we have to be nicer to the Americans or else they won't buy from us, that doesn't stand up either. When the Americans didn't like when Mr. Trudeau opposed their invasion of Grenada, and they didn't like when Mr. Diefenbaker didn't send troops to Vietnam or wouldn't go along with the blockade of Cuba, they continued to buy from us. Our trade continued to go up. The Americans, this idea that the Americans will be nice to us, the U.S. is a superpower, and superpowers don't have friends. They have interests, and they look after their interests. The problem is we've had no one here in Canada looking after our interests, and our standard of living is falling steadily as a result of that.
So what do you want to see happen then? Do you want to resuscitate the Progressive Conservative Party and bring it back as a player on the Canadian stage? Is that what you want to do?
I think we have to have a progressive alternative to the Liberals. I don't think in this last election people wanted to vote Liberal. From one end of the country to the other, they didn't want to. But they did not want to vote for Mr. Harper, whose views were, let's integrate our country, swamp our country into the United States, make us the 51st state. They didn't want that. But they were looking for an alternative. And in the past, it had been the Progressive Conservative Party that stood for Canadian sovereignty. And what I want more than anything else is to make sure that my country doesn't get absorbed into our powerful neighbor. And that's what I see happening under Mr. Martin on all fronts. So I want to build whatever vehicle vehicle that'll stand for keeping Canada Canadian.
So you want to see, you're still a part-time politician, I guess, for want of a better word. Is that right? I mean, you're still in the thick of it. You'll still stay in this fight, and if a party was to come around like that, you would run again for leadership, would you?
I've given 20 years of my life to this fight to keep Canada Canadian, and many others have given an even longer fight. I'm not prepared to see John A. Macdonald's dream of a nation coast to coast that could one day stand on the world stage and rival any other country and hold its head high. I'm not prepared to see that dream abandoned. Yeah, when I went back and I looked after my farm, as I mentioned to you. I'm 29 years as an organic farmer in Western Canada this year. Had a chance to see exactly what's happening on the ground, and I think that there are more Canadians now than ever before that are rejecting this Martin Harper view of seeing Canada as just a bit player inside the United States and want to build us into a sovereign nation.
Yeah. I'll just ask you finally then, since you mentioned the fact that you've been 29 years now as an organic farmer, you also told me this is the 100th anniversary of your family farm too, is that right?
It is. I'm the 4th generation on the farm. Our farm was founded in 1904, before the province of Saskatchewan actually, so we had a celebration on the farm this year of that. I'm rebuilding the little log house that my father was built in on the farm. It was built by my grandfather. I'm using the trees that my grandfather planted in 1907, but they died in our drought last year, and so we're cutting them down. We're rebuilding that house as an anniversary project for our 100th anniversary of our farm.
That must be quite a feeling to know that you've been on a piece of land for that many generations and for that long. I can't even begin to imagine what that must feel like.
Yes, well, it feels good to be there, and you know, I farm 2,500 acres, and I keep a third of that in natural boreal forest and prairie, and then about a third in clovers and alfalfas, and the other third in the other crops that I grow without chemicals. But it's nice I've got deer and elk, and I have 4 bears on my farm this summer, some moose and cranes and blue herons, and I like to keep that wildlife there, and the idea that I'm hopefully passing the farm along and the soil along in better shape than I found it. That's one of my goals.
That's great. Well, thanks a lot for coming in and doing this. I'm sure we'll see you again, politically speaking.
Well, I look forward to it. That's right. And a website, davidorchard.com.
Yes, absolutely.
People can kind of keep track. I'm doing a speaking swing through central Canada right now.
Well, we've been running it on the screen, so thanks very much for doing this, David.
All the best.
Okay.